I decided to do a series on guitar tab, how to read it, how to understand it. It's something I use all the time with students because it's easy and it saves you the obstacle of having to learn traditional music reading to get started on your instrument. It's not a replacement for traditional music notation. There are some differences and I'll cover that, but it's a great thing for getting going without having to put extra obstacles in the way of having to learn basically what is a new language in music before we can even start playing the notes. So that's one of the great things about tab. Now, traditional music notation it can be used for any instrument, and that's what you would normally consider to be sort of classical music notation. You've got I'll show you an example in a minute or two. You've got 5 lines going across, and you've got little dots and lines and things joining them up with other little symbols. You've probably seen it before, either in a book or online or somewhere. That's your normal music notation, whereas the tab is geared towards the stringed and fretted instruments, guitar, bass, and it's tailored towards being able to easily read a transcript of music on those instruments. Now, when I say it's not a replacement, one thing, the main thing that tab doesn't do for you, that music does, is it doesn't give you any timing information about the notes. It tells you the notes to play and it tells you where to play them, but it doesn't give you any timing information. Whereas if you read the traditional music notation, the staff, it also gives you the timing information as well as the pitch of the notes. So that's one thing that's missing from tab that music includes. That's not a biggie, because normally when we're learning to play a song or learning to play a piece of music, we'll be able to listen to the original as a reference point. Certainly in the styles of music that I'm familiar with, more contemporary styles, blues, rock, metal, those type of things, we might be learning a song, whereas we can listen to the original artist recording, whoever song it is, and we can hear what's being done. So the timing information isn't always that critical, but tab doesn't give you that. The music notation and tab, neither of them tell you which fingerings to use to play the notes. I've seen probably a handful of transcripts that do include that, but it looks really messy and really busy, and to be honest, it's not a common thing. You normally will never find your fingering information on tabs or music notation. So that's something that you're probably going to have to develop by either getting assistance from your guitar teacher or watching the original artist, how and where they play it with the fingerings. And with experience you'll get better at doing that, and it'll become more apparent when I run through some of the examples on the other videos in this series. So that's a basic overview. It's not a replacement, but it's a really handy tool to get us going when we don't have time, or we can't be bothered learning traditional music notation. And I'm one of those. I can't really be bothered with traditional music notation. I can't read it fast enough to be able to play to the music in time, certainly with higher tempo pieces. So I rely on tab a lot, and I use it a lot with my students, so I'm fully behind it. Doesn't make music bad, it just means it's a different way of doing it. So we'll look at an example. I'll show you a really basic example to get started with, and then the other little intricacies and other little notations of tab I'll cover in separate videos. But just to get started with, we'll look at a diagram that shows us, you should be able to see, we've got those 5 lines on the top row. That's the musical staff. We've got 5 lines, and you can see the letters representing the notes on those lines. Also, the gaps in between the lines, if you look, they represent notes as well. So reading from the left to the right, on the very top row, we start off with the letters telling us, why the lines or the spaces, which notes they represent. So immediately, if you're a guitar player, it might be telling you that that line or that gap is an A or a B or a G. You've got to memorise that in order to be able to articulate the note. Following on from that, we've got basically a little squiggle type emblem, which indicates that this staff is what we call a treble clef. We've got a treble clef and a bass clef. The treble clef is what we normally use on the electric guitar or acoustic guitar, because the range of notes fall within that region. The bass clef, as you might imagine, the lower tone notes, and that's normally notated below, on a line below the treble clef. Following that, we've got, on this example, if you look, there's a couple of little number 4s. That gives us the time signature of the piece. Sometimes it's called the meter, and the 4s represent, first off, there's 4 beats to each bar in this piece of music, and each beat is a quarter tone beat. So that means it's a basic 1, 2, 3, 4 count. I'll do another video entirely on the counts, time signatures, subdivisions, so I'm not going to cover that now, but this is, for the purpose of this example, 1, 2, 3, 4, if we were counting the song through as we're playing it. And then after that, you've got the little dots that I referred to earlier, interconnected by the little lines. Sometimes they're connected across ways, and again, I'll do another video on that, but that tells us the pitch and the timing of those notes. That's something that's not included on the tab. Now, moving down to the lower set of lines underneath, which says tab quite clearly down across the lines, you can see it gives you the names of the strings when you look at the lines on the tab. So the bottom line of your tab, the way that I remember it is the bottom is lower, so that's lower pitched. So the bottom line is my lowest pitched string, which is my E string, my thick E string. Sometimes call it string 6. And then going up through the lines, you can see the notes it's telling you. So it's E, A, D, G, B, and E. So that gives us a reference for what those lines mean. Each horizontal line on the tab represents one of the strings on our guitar. So that's one thing we need to get locked in, memorise to begin with. After that, on the tab, the only other thing we need to really think about is the little numbers that appear. So if we look at the first bar of the music on the example that I'm showing you, it shows us a little number 2 that's shown on the 4th string of the guitar. So that's the D string. So remember, with the string count, we count from the high E upwards. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's my 4th string, and it's asking me to play a note on the 2nd fret. So I've got open, 1st fret, 2nd fret. So in the first bar of that tab, that's the note that it's asking me to play. It's actually an E note. I know that from my own experience. You would also know that if you understood the music as well. But even if you didn't know that was an E, then you're playing the right note for the piece of music. So you don't have to worry about whether you know which note it is. I strongly recommend you try and learn the notes on the fretboard, but that could be an E, A, B, C, doesn't matter. You're playing the correct note as long as you're on the right string and in the right fret position. So when you see a number on a horizontal line, it's asking you to play a single note on that particular string. Now, moving on to the next bar on the example, we've got 2 numbers, they're actually zeros, and they're in line with each other vertically. So 0 means open string, so rather than having to play one of the frets, we're playing the strings open. Now, the zeros occur on your 1st and 2nd string, your E and B string, the high ones, those strings, and because they're played vertically, you can see them next to each other, lined up nice and neatly. That means that we play those 2 notes together rather than in sequence. So whenever you see numbers in tab vertically, that means we play them together like that. So we're not playing one after another or one after another, we're playing them together. And that's the basis of a small chord, which moves us on to the third section, the third bar of the music, and we've actually got 4 notes. They're all vertically in line, so they all need to be played together. And we start off with the again, we'll start off with the first string. We've got a 2nd fret on our first string, then we've got a 3rd fret on our 2nd string, then we've got a 2nd fret again on our 3rd string, and then we've got our 4th string open. We'll play them all together. Hopefully you'll recognise that if you've done some basic chord work. That is your open D chord. So that sequence of 2, 3, 2, 0 going up, that's how an open D chord looks on guitar tab on your music. You might often find, if you're lucky, as well as giving you the numbers and the strings, if it's a chord, it sometimes says above the tab what chord it is, which makes it a lot easier, because if you see that to begin with, and I'm taking myself back in a time machine now, before I had my experience what I've got now, all those numbers, I'm 2, 3, 2, and it's not telling me which fingers to use. I could be doing anything to try and figure it out, but you know, from where I am now, as soon as I see those numbers in that sequence, I see a D chord. And that's not magic, that's just the fact that I've been doing it for some time. So the longer that you practice your guitar, learn music and understand your tab, the more easy it'll become to recognise these patterns. Because it's sometimes easy just to memorise it as a chord, because if I said to a lot of my students, play a D chord, they'll play me a nice D chord, hopefully, fingers crossed. Whereas if I was to say, explain the tab verbally and say, well, play me a 1st string, 2nd fret, 2nd string, 3rd fret, 3rd string, 2nd fret, and an open 4th string, the cogs would be turning. It'd be like, well, what am I doing there? Whereas when you make the association that that's a chord, it makes it a whole lot easier for you. So that's your basic introduction. There's lots of other stuff on tab. I'm going to cover those in the next videos, but the takeaway is the horizontal lines represent the strings on your guitar, the numbers represent which frets to play them at. Doesn't tell you which fingers to use to play them at. With experience, if it's a chord, that's fairly simple, but even if it's a single note, with experience, go back to the first bar of music there. We've got a single note, that was the 2nd fret on the 4th string. I use my 1st finger to play that. I could use my 2nd finger to play that. I could use any finger to play that, but it makes no sense to me really to play it with my 3rd and 4th fingers, because then my hand's down here below the note, out of position. And it just depends really on what you're going to play next and the rest of the music. But this is just a really simple starting off example. I'll talk more about that and how it affects the fingers you use depending on the different techniques that we see in the tab. So all that's good to get you started off with. It's worth spending a little bit of time. It doesn't take a lot of time to learn tab. It's one of those really easy things, and it's a shortcut to get you going without having to go through the rigmarole of learning music, which gets you down to be able to play the songs you want to play, playing whatever you want to play, and being able to enjoy